Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Inclusive Education in Washington, Crafting and Implementing Inclusive IEPs. Thank you again for all joining and signing up for the webinar and the webinar series. I'll give a little housekeeping. We do have closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, just put a message in the chat or the Q&A. It is being recorded. This recording will be shared with all registrants about 4 or 5 days after we get it all nice and pretty for you, and we will send it out to everyone that has signed up. If you have any questions, any technical difficulties, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. It's available at all times, and we check that and monitor that to help you in any way we can. So without further ado, I'll introduce our guest speakers. First, we have Gail Ghere, is a research associate with the TIES Center and the National Center on Educational Outcomes at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Ghere has over 40 years of experience in pre-K-12 education, ranging being a relevant or related service provider to a director of special education in a mid-sized urban public school. She has published in areas of collaborative instructional systems for special education, inclusive of students who are English learners, MTSS for all, separated school placements, classroom assessment practices, professional development processes, program evaluation, and paraprofessional development. Our next speaker, Jaimee Kidder, serves as a special education program supervisor at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction in Washington State, with a focus on inclusionary practices and positive behavior support for all students. Dr. Kidder has 20 years of experience in special education and is deeply committed to working in a variety of spaces to support educators in implementing inclusive best practices, disrupting unjust and ableist beliefs about students with disabilities, partnering authentically with students and families, and building school communities in which all students belong. Our last speaker, but still with the group, Jennifer Sommerness, is a researcher at the TIES Center and National Center on Educational Outcomes at the University of Minnesota. She is known for her dedication in inclusive education and student success within general education. Jennifer has partnered in initiatives aimed at empowering educators to create inclusive learning environments where all students, including those with extensive support needs, can thrive. Her expertise and collaborative approach to professional development equipped educators to embrace inclusive practices and foster a culture of belonging for each and every learner. Jennifer's background, first as an inclusive special educator, then as a national independent consultant with a background in educational administration and professional development, provides the basis for her perspectives and practical strategies that create systems change. She has interest and is published in the areas of professional development processes, collaborative instructional systems for special education, inclusive of students who are English learners, classroom assessment practices, transition age inclusive practices, positive behavioral supports and communication, and paraprofessional development. So without further ado, please welcome Jennifer, Gail, and Jaimee.
Hi, folks. We're so excited to be here with you today and share a little bit about this resource that Washington State, in partnership with our colleagues here at the TIES Center, has developed and made available for educators and families, as well as self-advocates in Washington. All right, so we can move to the next slide. You've heard a little bit about us, and so we'll talk a little bit about the TIES Center.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. We're excited to be here today. We have been able to share this resource probably since February. We've been in January, February, we've been able to share it primarily in Washington State. And it's really been a great opportunity to collaborate together on this work. And it comes from work that we did earlier at the TIE Center, where we collaborated with the University of Washington at Herring Center. So the TIE Center is kind of to ground us. The TIE Center does technical assistance nationally with states, districts, and schools. We're focused on an inclusive education overall for kids with disabilities, but when we say all, we mean all. So we're really looking at our being inclusive from the start with our kids with more extensive support needs too, not thinking like, oh, you didn't mean them, we mean them. We're being very inclusive that way. And so just kind of we're grounded at our home is at the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota, and so and we have a nice day today, which I'm kind of really surprised about. But you can take a look at the slide what the TIES means, but it really is active engagement of kids with disabilities in our gen ed classrooms to lead to better outcomes. Okay, yep.
Okay. Next, we want to do a couple of things. One, we want to get to know who's here and who's joined us today, but we also want to make sure that our Mentimeter interactive way of having some conversations together is something that you are able to access, and we want to do that before we launch into everything, so we can just keep rolling once we get you online. So if you could follow this, either the QR code, or if you want to go to menti.com and then that number right there, 5657-4182. And we can put that in the chat too if
Yep, I'll grab that.
if people are having a tough time with that. But if you could just do that, and then we're going to see who's here today. And I'm going to see if I can switch my screen without too much effort here. There we go. People must be online. We're seeing the bubbles pop in. That's good. So we have 2 administrators and a couple of others. It'd be interesting to know if you want to tell in the chat who you are identifying as today. We also know that people wear multiple hats. So we're just thinking with this content and with this group in mind, who are you today in terms of coming and listening to this information? And if you'd like to, since there are 3 of you that are saying other, if you want to share who you are in the chat, go ahead. Or what your role is. You don't have to necessarily, we can maintain anonymity if you'd like. All right, we have 1 related service provider. Looks like we still have some people that are online but not responding. So I want to make sure that people have a chance to respond one way or the other, and make sure that you're on, so that when we do this again later, that it's real easy for you to just open the app back up. I see Joyner is saying a self-advocate parent and administrator, parent center. Miriam, great. A mental health manager, fantastic. This also helps us know which points to really emphasize and which parts, if we get crunched on time, that we can assume that you'll go back and look at it when you've got some time.
Yeah, so this kind of lets us know that you got on to the Mentimeter because we'll be using it throughout. If you see the soft color yellow slide coming up in the thing, we know we've got to a Mentimeter slide.
If you're not able to access it, let us know in the chat if you're having difficulties. That way we can maybe help problem solve.
Yeah. Well, maybe if you're having trouble getting on, just text us. I'll be watching the chat. And then also we'll, kind of hopefully as we get to the next one, it's got it all figured out and you can enter your thoughts.
Right. Well, thanks for engaging with us there. I want to share a little bit more about what we're here to talk with you about today. So we've got some learning objectives for our session today. What we hope to spend some time with you doing is sharing a little bit about this resource, Comprehensive Inclusive Education in Washington State. Throughout the resource, we are hopeful that you'll see a lot of opportunities to challenge assumptions that teams might make that are barriers to inclusion, and looking at how the principles for comprehensive inclusive education that you'll see laid out in this resource can be applied to the process of developing IEPs for students who are eligible for special education services. One thing that we really want to emphasize here is that for all students with disabilities, including students who have extensive support needs, high quality instruction includes both progress in the general education curriculum as well as an inclusive IEP. So with that, we'll keep moving and we'll share a little bit about our agenda for today. The resource, and we'll show you a little bit about this resource in a couple of slides, but it's broken into 4 steps. It's a document that's broken into 4 steps. And so we're going to spend most of the session today talking about the different steps within this resource and how it helps IEP teams take a step-by-step approach to building a really high quality and inclusive IEP. So you can see we'll talk a little bit about an overview of the principles of what we believe to be best practice for writing an inclusive IEP. And then we'll go through these steps. So having collaborative conversations with the school team and with the family and student, creating the inclusive IEP, and then weaving that IEP into the student's day and engaging in ongoing support and instruction to make sure that it's implemented. So that's what we're going to be doing today. You can go to the next slide. We have one more thing to share with you. We have a resource document that we want to make you aware of. We'll be sharing that. You can access this QR code that you see on the right side of your screen to find that, or I know that Gail is putting the link to that in the chat as well. What this is just a place for you during this webinar to find all the links to the documents that we'll share today. We have a lot of resources from Washington State to share with you today, and we don't want anyone to feel stressed about having to find those links and save those links. So if you just access this resource page, all of the links to the resources that you'll see here are in one place so that they're easy to find later. All right, let's go to the next slide. We want to mention in moving to the next slide that we have just a little bit about Washington State's perspective on this. So, we know that in supporting school districts to provide special education services, that's part of my role at the state education agency, that we want to make sure that folks are doing that in a way that follows the law, both the state law in Washington and the federal law around special education services. But we also think that providing high quality inclusive IEPs sometimes means thinking beyond just what the law requires at a minimum. So our state agency, it's called OSPI, the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. We're really committed to making sure that students have access to their least restrictive environment, or their LRE. And when we say students, we mean all students. So this resource was developed to support teams to do that, with a focus on including students who have extensive support needs. So that might include students who have intellectual or developmental disabilities, as well as other students. So you'll see here in this resource that we're focusing on both writing an IEP that follows the law and what the law requires at a minimum, but also how that IEP can be developed so that it's really meaningful and supports inclusive practices. All right, so let's look at the next slide and we'll see what the resource looks like. This is just a screenshot of our website on OSPI's website where this resource lives. So I think we can start to click through. We've got some arrows to walk you through it. Right here is where you can find the guide to this resource. It's a PDF document, so you can find it there. And then if we keep clicking through, you'll see that there are, again, these different steps that we mentioned to you, and you can find the link to this webpage in the chat. So we're going to talk about the whole guide, that PDF document that you see on the top arrow, and then we'll move through each of the steps. And there are some specific additional resources that teams can download on those pages for each of those steps. So that's just wanted to orient you to that resource a little bit. All right, let's go to the next slide. One last thing that we wanted to mention is that we want to acknowledge that these materials are in some ways pretty state specific. So they were produced as guidance in partnership between OSPI, the Washington State Education Agency, and the TIES Center. And they were developed as guidance for educators and families in Washington. All state laws around special education are different from state to state. And they're anchored to the federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So I mention that because different states are going to have different requirements, and your state might have different requirements than what you see in this resource. So we still hope that it's helpful, especially as an example of how we can support teams to implement and think about inclusive education, but just be aware there may be some differences in what your state requires compared to Washington State. All right.
Okay. One of the things we just wanted to just kind of back up for a minute, and Gail touched on it a little bit earlier as far as this generation of this resource, and that there was one that we did with the UW Herring Center prior to that. And where it all came from and where it stemmed from was really this conversation or this realization. It was actually during COVID where gen ed teachers and parents and special ed teachers were all trying to figure out how this works. Like, how do we do this? You know, what could this look like? And especially during the time of COVID, people were wondering how to support students well. And, you know, so in the same day, we heard all three of these questions across meetings that we were having. You know, the gen ed teacher was saying, if I could only see how this IEP fits with the grade level content, I could figure out how to make it work. Right. And then we heard at the same time, you know, from the special ed teacher saying, agreed, but I'm unsure how to make that integration happen. And at the very same time, the family member, the parent, was saying, I'm supporting him with his general ed instruction and classwork at home, but when do we work on his IEP goals? Right. And so there were three very interesting types of questions going on of how do we put this all together? What could this look like? And so that was kind of the genesis of thinking about how do we make sure that people can understand how to implement an IEP and provide services supportive of the general education curriculum with that very intentional collaboration and communication across families and the school team members. So that's where this all came from. Couple of other things that we just really want you to understand as we go into this, and in terms of also where this comes from, or principles or assumptions that we're making. I call out that green box first when I'm thinking about it, is that we're assuming that, and we believe that every student is a general education student. So whether they're walking or wheeling through the door, every student in that building is a general education student, right? And then you go to the yellow box where, you know, we're thinking about for each student that's eligible, on top of that, each student that is eligible for special education services, their educational program has these three parts. So in addition to being a gen ed student and having full access and engagement within the general education, then we're hoping that the IEP is going to help support and provide additional access and engagement and opportunities within that gen ed. So the IEP is not the student's sole educational program or curriculum. And we find that very often, the more extensive or complex a student needs are, then sometimes that isn't the case, right? So the IEP is seen as kind of a standalone thing that we're teaching, and we want to make sure that people understand that we're talking about how to support and you know, provide opportunities within Gen Ed. So the three parts in that yellow box, the three parts that everybody should have the opportunity to be a part of: the general education curriculum, those are the grade level standards with your same age peers. So we don't want, you know, students who are in 5th grade having, you know, 2nd grade standards based. We're talking same grade level, age level, access and engagement to the Gen Ed curriculum. And that they also have all of the school's routines and activities that everybody has the opportunities to participate in, whether that's something outside the school day, in extracurriculars, just, you know, all the things that go on during the day, recess and lunch, and all of those routines and activities. And then there's the IEP that they have on top of those things that other people may not need to be accessing the Gen Ed in the same way. We also know that in that blue box where you see that students learn and thrive when they're valued, visible members of their classroom and their school communities. And so this is actually repeated in the resource in multiple places, just because it is so important to keep this as the guideposts and the principles that undermine the work in this resource. Quickly, this is kind of a reiteration, but not really, because there's a little clarification to it that this is making the point again that the comprehensive inclusive education program consists both of the general education curriculum and the routines and the IEP. And it's so important because when a student's program becomes their IEP, if that is their program and their instruction, then we know that the learning opportunities are greatly diminished, and so are their post-school outcomes and successes that people are experiencing. And so we want to make sure to be supporting meaningful and concrete connections between these two things, and this process is intended to do that. Another kind of overarching umbrella that we have throughout this also, you would see within the resource of these 3 guiding questions that IEP teams ask. And so as teams are working through this process together, and sometimes, you know, and when you first start doing it, it might be different in the way that you're thinking about IEP development, but we find that revisiting these 3 questions, both at the beginning of an IEP meeting or throughout an IEP meeting, but certainly by the end of the IEP meeting, you can see at the bottom, the answer to each of these questions needs to be a yes. So those questions that we want to think about is, will the student experience belonging as a member in their school and general education classrooms? Will the student be actively participating at school across the whole school day? And will the student be learning the grade level general education curriculum? And so as you're working through the IEP process and thinking together as a team about how to do that, we want those questions to be answered yes. And if not, there might be parts of the IEP that you need to return to and collaborate, you know, to have some conversations about how we might get to yes. Another thing that you will see within the resource is that there is a person named Jacob. And that's within the PDF that Jaimee showed at the beginning, the great big red arrow. That PDF has the story of an actual student who is a student. His name is not actually Jacob, but the family. We are very thankful to the family and the school for allowing us to use Jacob as a face to this story so that people could actually see what this might look like for someone with more extensive support needs. And his name is not Jacob, but a special thank you to that Washington family who generously allows us to use photos of their son to exemplify what this can look like. And throughout the document, any of the blue boxes even if it's not a photo. Most of them have a photo within that, but if there isn't, any of those highlighted blue boxes are that student story that is threaded throughout. Lastly, before I hand it off to Gail to actually dig into the steps, we just wanted to kind of give you an overview. And I think, you know, when Jaimee showed the screenshot of the different steps as well, but this is just another visual to see, you know, first we're going to talk about collaborative conversations that happen, then actually creating the inclusive IEP, then creating an education day at a glance, which is something that helps support teams actually implement what they've created together, and then that ongoing education and support piece. With that, I hand it to Gail.
Okay. So with all kind of that background of how we got to this place, we're going to just start digging into the resource now. And so that when you leave here, hopefully at the end of this webinar, you can, you have a sense of the big picture and some of the details and the details that go with it, that you can decide, you know, how it might fit in your life, how you might use it in different ways. And we see this being used in different ways. We see it being used by IEP teams starting to make the change and figuring out how to do it. We see it being brought up by parents to IEP teams to say, hey, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to move in this direction. We're doing webinars with principals so that they have a sense of it and how the vibe would feel different in an IEP meeting compared to a traditional IEP meeting, so that even if they're not experts on this process, they kind of have a sense of, this is going in the right way, or this is being derailed, and we could do this differently. And special ed directors, we're working with lots of different people in different roles to have them think about in their job with their role, how do they use it? So depending on how you self-identified, kind of think about that through those lenses. So the first step of the roadmap that Jen mentioned is the collaborative conversations. So next step, Jen. Next slide. Yeah, so there's two parts in this piece. And the thing about this resource is it's not just writing the IEP. It is, I mean, that's a core piece of it. You're going to get into two, and it's about it. But it's implementing it. We just don't want to write a beautiful IEP and it's never implemented. So this gives the whole roadway from how do you get the groundwork laid to have the conversations you need, to writing the IEP collaboratively, to implementing it, and then sustaining it over time. So there's two parts to step one. One is engaging in collaborative conversations with the family, and the other one is collaborative conversations with the school team members. So we're going to go through those, and we're going to show you a couple kind of resources that go with each of those steps to support teams when they need, when some extra guidance in that area would be beneficial. So next one, Jen. Yeah. And then you can see, okay, so the collaborative conversations with family. This is a key component that often doesn't happen. Ideally, this would happen at the beginning of the school year, but I mean, for sure, you want to have it before the IEP meeting. We're depending on where the IEP falls during the school year. But what it does is it really conveys very strongly the value that families are valued members of the team, that their hopes and dreams for their child are important in thinking about how they want education to look for their child and where to think about how to go. And when you do these kind of conversations with family, it gives you that big long-term view, even if families can't totally articulate it all. And I understand that this is something that might develop for families and they kind of evolve in their own thinking, or it changes over time. And then student voice comes in and it changes over time. But it's one where if a kindergarten teacher, if you're just looking at an IEP and you're writing annual year to year to year to year, you can you could be going in a zigzag pattern. But if you're looking at long-term, when the child leaves, what do we want the opportunities for that young adult to be? Then we're thinking, I have to have all of our annual IEPs aligned and moving in that direction. And it also is an opportunity, these conversations, for parents to ask questions about the inclusive education, for schools to share information, because they're, sometimes, especially if this hasn't been the way that The school has been organized in the past. It can be, there's fears like, are my child's goals really being met? How do I do that? What does it look like? So this is the time to start having those conversations and build or extend your trust that you have with families. So, so this is the next one. So this is an example. This is an example of a vision statement that it's actually kind of a one-pager that a family in Washington wrote and has had puts in the IEP. She has the family passes it out to all the schools and discusses it, has it put in the IEP as part since he's been in, I don't know, at least kindergarten, maybe before that. But let me just read the vision statement out loud and just have you listen to it. My vision statement. I will live my adulthood independently, attend college and pursue my career of choice. I have a likable personality which I will use to build meaningful, long-lasting connections and relationships with others. I will find long-term companionship and love with a significant other. Get married if I choose to do so. As an independent man, I will have lots of opinions and ideas and apply my leadership skills to both my education journey and my future career. I will have my own hobbies, activities, and interests that I enjoy. I will have confidence, morals, integrity, ethics, and be respectful to others. I will see myself living with a disability as a source of pride and joy and understand my self-worth. My community will embrace me as a neurodiverse human being that brings value to the world. So I wish I could see in webinar, you don't see everybody's faces, but I wish I could see your face and have this conversation, because the first time that I heard this, I saw this vision, I'm just listening to it and I'm thinking, this is what I want for all of my children. This is what I hope that my kids will have, that they have these choices in life and that they belong and they find love and they have meaningful relationships in life and they develop the skills to give them choices. Everything that I would want for my own children who don't have disabilities, I would want is captured in this vision statement. The interesting thing for teams is that as they read down it, and if you blow this up on your slides in the future, the slides are linked in the resource sheet, you'll see that under the profile, I think it's in the second paragraph or down there, that it shares that this young man has Down syndrome. And so sometimes when we share this and we bring that to people's attention, there's some dissonance in their mind, like this is not what they had envisioned. But it also opens up a whole new way of thinking that what this young man's life can look like, and what we as a school need to be invested in helping him achieve. And so when you start out with a vision statement like this from a family and you have that conversation, you have set a different trajectory for writing a different IEP. So, and I'm kind of watching the chat at the same time. Yes, it is. I would agree, Joseph. The vision statement's a great base for a positive flip. Yep. And you'll see hopefully some of the linkage there too. And okay, so next slide, Jen. So you'll see that in the examples, the blue examples that go through, this is, you'll see an example of each step or most of the steps. Sometimes we combined them for examples for Jacob. And in Jacob's case, his family was really looking for meaningful friendships and peers, participation in all the activities that are happening, him getting to be able to be independent and self-advocate and guide his needs that he wants, really keeping him connected to advancements in technology, because that will open up doors and opportunities for him, and that he is valued and welcome in all the communities he's in. And so that's the wishes, the dreams, hopes, and dreams for the family. And that gives you a lot of ideas for thinking about how an IEP can go. Next one. And so what it is, and you'll see this linked in the resource sheet, there actually is a companion document to step one. and step 1.1. And that is just some guiding questions for teams that haven't had these kind of conversations before, how they might do it, to share with the family, to say, hey, these are the things we're kind of, we'd love to talk about, to kind of be that bridge between moving to understand, to move to this kind of conversation if you need it. If you don't need it, and this is a type of conversation that's been happening, this it's there, it's an optional thing. But we have found that some teams find that it gives them some guidance, some kind of sentence stems, kind of like how we use to kind of get going on having these meaningful conversations. Okay, so the next part of step, we're going to go to the Mentimeter. I forgot. Hand over to Jen. Jen, you're muted.
Oh,
Or
yes,
people are just
there we
going
are.
to it. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so if you have not gotten onto the Mentimeter, again, I'll leave this up for just a second because we didn't have everybody on the first one, but use the QR code or go to menti.com and use that access number of 56574182. And we're going to answer these questions and think about these things together. Let me see if my screen will let me. Whoops, nope. Hold on. There we go. I have too many things driving over here. Okay, so we have all of our dots. So let's think about this first question together. What do you think? And again, the code is on the top. If you still need it that way, you can go on your phone and do it that way as well without the QR code. But to what extent is envisioning the future a part of your current IEP process? And the scale at the bottom, if it's hard to see, we have it does not include envisioning. All the way to the right is envisioning is very much a part. Okay. We have some people, it looks like, are further over towards the envisioning is very much a part, but most people right now are kind of in the middle. Okay. Give people more opportunity to get into the program with us. So it looks like it's not that it's not happening. Like we have no one that's over at a 1 of does not include envisioning. So at least we have some visioning. Certainly room for improvement. There's one that's very much apart. Yay, that pulled our diagram over a little bit. That's good. It'd be interesting to, well, we do have a follow-up question to this. So we'll see if you have more as you're thinking about how much or how little it's happening. Think about things that you can share with others. Okay. So let's move to the next question, which is, how can learning about valued life outcomes affect IEP writing, do you think? And this is an open response, so you can just type it in and it'll appear and we can have more of a dialogue about it. From your perspective, how might that, thinking about the valued life outcomes, and sometimes even just that term or that way of posing it to people, whether it's an educator or a family member, it might not be, those are valued life outcomes. That's a kind of a new way of thinking about it for everybody sometimes. But it's that North Star. They drive the IEP. My guess is maybe that's the person who is experiencing the envisioning most often, perhaps, right? You can see that it's driving the IEP. Oh, I love the advances the IEP from 1-year commitment to a lifelong commitment. And I would totally agree. So if you have someone, you can never do it too young, right? To have that vision out there. And I think revisiting that vision repeatedly is just so important. You know, the vision stays put, and where we are, it creates that tension between where we are and where we want to be. So I love that commitment or that consistency towards that vision. Meaningful transition plans, for sure. As kids get to the age of transition, it's critical. Create more urgency and awareness for teams in their role in designing instruction and supports to move beyond the basics or bare minimum. Absolutely. I also have seen where students are voicing what they want, just so powerful, which of course it would be, but to be able to, even the nuances, there's one student that comes to mind when I think about him saying that he has some relationships, but he wanted more, right? And so, you know, even if there are things that we think that we know already, it's so important to think about how do we keep moving forward with it, make it really rich. Profound and positive impact. Historically, IEPs have been very here and now focused. Yeah. And that's our hope, is that it's not keeping it, you know, to the things that we're just collecting data on this year, right? Which on one hand, yes, IEPs are meant to be things that we write for 1 year, and we kind of agree to what it is that we're going to focus on this year, but it also has to be balanced with that not just here and now, right? Could impact identified needs, which then impacts goals, modifications, and adaptations. Yes. I think that also, you know, the more that you can include or think about in that valued life outcomes, if something changes in a family's life, or if a student has a different focus that they want after high school, how does that impact the goals and modifications and what they're trying out, you know, in terms of technology, even, you know, what's going to fit best. And it helps the team to center their planning on the student rather than a program. Absolutely. I love it.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Okay, so the second part of step 1, which I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on, but give you some resources for, is where the team collaboration is. And this is that meeting at the beginning of the school year where Gen Ed and Special Ed and all the related services meet, and they really, they kind of teach each other. They don't kind of, they teach each other. And it lays the groundwork for their collaboration going forward. So it's really the Gen Ed teacher talks about the content for the year, what we're focusing on. You can do it across different, the different content areas. What are the roles and the routines in the classroom, not the roles, but the routines and traditions in the classroom. How does the classroom run? All the pieces that everyone on the special ed team wants to know about, so they can figure out where the student can just do it independently, where they can do it with peers, where they can do it, it needs to be adapted, and how to do that. At the same time, at that same meeting, the special ed team can tell the teacher and inform the teacher all about the student, about the needs that are there, where they think that things are going to be able to be, how they're going to be supported, what are the, who's part of his team, all the different pieces. You lay it out. It's the big map of the child and how people work together. But it's where we spend trying to look at the whole class and the individual needs of the student and mix them together and marry them. It's a hugely important conversation, because what we're trying to do is, what we want to do is for the student to be part of the class, the Gen Ed class. And so everything is on the table to figure out how to do that in meaningful ways. So the next slide actually just shows a tool that comes from the TIE Center, and it's really starting your collaboration off right. It's part of our, you'll see it a little bit later, the 51545 tool, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But this is a series of questions for that initial conversation before you get into more specific lesson planning and material, content materials and how we're going to do all that, to know what is the flow and how does it work. This is a protocol that can help teams move through that and develop common ground across them. And then they also start sharing they start initial thinking about who's going to do what, how are we going to do that in the classroom, makes us have more flexible service delivery models, kind of stretches our roles in different ways. All that is very positive for being nimble to meet the needs of kids in Gen Ed. Next slide. And then you'll see a picture, you'll see an example of Jacob where they really had the conversation, what they talked about, how they came to it. And it's hard to see Jacob in that classroom picture there, but he's on the far back corner. But I just love it. He's right in the mix of all the kids in the class. And this was, part of it. How to even maneuver in the classroom was something they had to figure out. Okay, next slide. Okay, so those were the two big pieces. They set the grounding for getting into step 2.
Great, thanks, Gail. Okay, step 2 is a really meaty one.
Yeah, so we had to get to it.
And I want to reiterate that all of these things are not only in your resource page, but also in the actual resource itself. And you will have these slides. So if there are parts that feel like we're kind of going through faster than you would need, please check back and look at all of those. Just in thinking about time, we want to make sure that we get through everything. But this is a big chunk. Step 2, and it's as you can see, going through all of the present levels and the goals and the service delivery and so forth, and the SDI. And so let's get into it. One of the things that this resource really centers on, and something that we are pulling through all of it, is this notion of these 3 major learning components that are student-centered, right? So we have that image of a student in the middle, and we really mean it. This is a person-centered way of thinking about what IEPs should have a part of them. And so when we think about those 3 major learning components, and this in particular, we're talking today about students with disabilities and IEPs that can be inclusively integrated into Gen Ed and supportive of teams and students. But when you really think about across an entire school day, any student is experiencing engaging in grade level academics and other essential skills, interacting with others, and participating in routines and transitions. And it's a challenge really to think about what wouldn't fit into those 3 overarching learning components for any student. So when we think about what a student with a disability who might need supports and services through an IEP, focusing on these 3 areas is one way or one lens to really make sense of what to prioritize when you're goal writing and thinking of things like that. And so engaging in grade level academics and other essential skills, we obviously engaging in grade level academics is an essential skill, right? And so that is the point. We want people to be engaging in grade level academics. There are also other essential skills that are supportive of that engagement. So, we can think about positive behaviors and supports that students might need. We can think about organizational skills and self-advocacy and things like that would be really essential skills that you would have as you're engaging in those grade level academics. We also need to think about those participating in routines and transitions. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about how it is that, from the moment you get off the bus, or how you get onto the bus, or who you get onto the bus with, then into the door and to your locker or your cubby or to your desk. All of those parts are things that we can learn. It's thousands of teachable moments throughout the whole day. And students are able to learn from one another and from the experiences, and just thinking about, you know, how many times can we have people participate in everything in that richness that goes on within a school day with one another. And then there's lastly the interacting with others, that major component. So thinking about that not only to help a person actually have the means to communicate, which is a civil right, but also that competency, right, of being able to express themselves and have ideas and not like certain things, and you know, really be able to engage in conversations as it relates to interacting with the instruction, with the school, with all of the community, and just to belong in that way. So when you're thinking about goal writing and you're thinking about all of those three overarching pieces, then when you're pulling out the goals, and we suggest in the resource that it's no more than 6 to 8 goals. And so sometimes people look at us, and again, like Gail said, it'd be great to see people's faces. Sometimes people look at us like, you're kidding, right? You know, like you have 50-page IEPs that have, you know, 20 goals on it. And it really, when you think about it, if we can, and we're going to talk in a minute about how these goals can look, to have them varied, rich, and broad is what we'll be speaking about. But another piece on that second bullet, the thinking about a comprehensive, inclusive education, you have to think about it in terms of that whole child, the whole day is another really important piece. So it's not just the 6 or 6.5 hours that they're in a school building. That person has family, that person has community, they have activities outside of school. And so how do we build in those things, again, tied to those valued life outcomes in a very real way, so that we're choosing goals across the whole day that support that whole child? One of the first steps to achieving goals that look like that, or understanding which ones should be a priority, is really based on thinking about the strength-based present levels of academic achievement of functional performance, or PLAP. And so there are parts that have to be there. And again, going back to what legally has to be there versus what we just know is good practice for achieving inclusive environments and inclusive opportunities for students. So we have to have it, you know, the current academic and functional skills and needs that students have. We need to know how the disability is affecting that involvement and that progress. And we need to have a foundation for the making annual goals. And then we can also add on to that in a strength-based way, really think about high expectations and presuming competence, and that person-centered piece. Like, what are a person's strengths? What are their passions? What are their goals? What are their dreams? And then considering that whole child across the whole day, and again, informed by valued life outcomes and priorities. And very often you'll see PLAPs that don't have all those pieces and are just kind of a report of, you know, like a laundry list of things that a person may not be able to participate in, or how their disability affects them. But a PLAP is a strength-based PLAP can be written in such a way that teams see the opportunities, and especially within like gen ed, teachers are able to see the opportunities. So it kind of answers that initial bullet of, how do I do this if I could just see this? So just to give you one example, there are many more in the resource, so we're not going to think about that too much. We're just going to give just one quick example here. But thinking about the wording that's on the left versus the wording that's on the right, you can see where the limitations of a student are highlighted on the right-hand side, versus how we actually know what fits, what supports, what strategies there might be that we've tried, and other things that we can focus on or use to be, you know, motivational, or, you know, you can read it in the first the first visual there of Jane is a motivated and curious lifelong learner with strength in visual learning. She excels at making connections by learning about people, places, and things, especially animals. Jane benefits from hands-on learning supported by visuals, demonstrations, verbal instructions, and confirmation of understanding. Jane is actually based on a real person as well, who she actually was described similar to the right-hand side. But the switch in this way of thinking and this way of knowing about her, she wanted to be a vet technician, right? So that was the valued life outcome. That was what they were aligning with. And you can see the richness and the difference. And I think that it also shows how, like, if teachers are thinking about how to universally design something, different access points, different ways to engage Jane based on the description on the left-hand side versus the right. Again, there are many more examples in the resource. So I think I'm going to skip this one just for time. And I didn't see the text coming through. Okay. Do we want to do the Mentimeter right now, you guys?
I think
How
we
we
can do
doing?
the one right after the PLEP and IEP goals. I think we skip this one and go to the,
Okay.
can you skip a one on a Mentimeter?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, why don't you, yeah, just keep going with the IEP goals after, and then we'll do it after that.
Okay. So again, similar to thinking about those collaborative conversations and helping a family or a student or even a team to think about valued life outcomes, I think writing strength-based PLAPs can be very similar to that it's something that takes some practice sometimes. And it might be a different way of kind of thinking about how to write it. And so again, using this resource that is in our step 2 tool, it just has guiding questions around it. And have you thought of these things? And just kind of recenters or reframes the language that we're using, the things that we want to make sure that we're including. And so I encourage you to check that out. For Jacob, his strength-based PLAP, you know, again, there are things in there about him, but he, you know, again, expressed that he has some friends, he wanted more. Reading was one of his favorite activities, so including that more often, independently reading graphic novels, pairing him up with peers who also love graphic novels, pairing him up with peers who love the types of graphic novels on the same genre that he did. All of those things can be included in a strength-based PLAP so that you know what a person likes and what they love. And then it helps to just make those connections within the instruction within the real time. So if we're thinking about writing IEP goals based on that, that's the next step, right? So we know, and strength-based PLAPs does not mean that we aren't talking about what a student needs. We need to know what a student needs, but we can also include strategies that we've tried and where we're going with it as a team. And then when we get to the writing the inclusive goals, we need to make sure, as per the IDEA, that they're measurable and meaningful, right? Or measurable. We need the condition which the skills are needed, the skill that's being taught, and the criterion to determine when the goal has been mastered. And that can include the type and intensity of any prompting that's going on, right? So those are things that we're familiar with, that structure. We also want to add to our thinking of how they could be really meaningful and within thinking about those 3 overarching learning components, like I said before. And if you're thinking about paring it down to 6 or 8, and especially if you have so many already, how do you even choose, right? So we want to make sure they're meaningful. We want to make sure they're broad, they're rich, and they're varied. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. But we also want to make sure that whenever it's possible that we're writing it to show how they can be incorporated into the gen ed class. There's also just this little trick of thinking about across the school day as 3 words that you put actually in the goal. And, you know, by design then, we're thinking about it's not just happening in reading, it's happening all day long. It's not just happening in math. Where can we find other places to practice that skill? So here's an example. And now thinking about broad, rich, and varied, we want to think about if it's broad, we're thinking about something, and this is a person who is actually a multilingual learner with a disability. And so we want broad to be like throughout that school day, including both preferred and non-preferred activities, right? That's what, actually, that might have been a different example that we pulled. This one, thinking about how broad it can be done across the day, and you can see the language of across the day. So here's the goal: given an opportunity for collaborative work, a think, pair, share, partner group work, and access to communication supports like vocabulary, visuals, the student will participate with peers, share an idea, share their work, listen to a peer share with an adult support, improving peer interactions throughout the day. And the criteria is from 3 out of 6 times with 3 or more gestural prompts to 5 out of 6 times with 2 or fewer gestural prompts as measured by teacher data collection. Versus the goal that he used to have, which is when interacting with peers, the student will respond by saying hello to peers that say hi to him 100% of the time without prompting. So you can see we're still working on the same skill-ish, right? I mean, just responding to someone in the hall that says hi to you is you know, maybe the same skill. We could have a whole different conversation about that. But you can see on the left, we're doing this across the whole day. It's a broad goal. We want to look at him doing these things, sharing ideas, sharing work, listening to someone else. We're teaching that back and forth of communicative competence, right? We also can see where it's rich. It's not just, you know, when someone says hi to him. This is throughout the whole day, when he's in partner groups, when he has collaborative work, when he's with one other person, when he's with large groups of people, right? And then it's varied. So we're not just looking for him to say hi back. We're looking for him to do all sorts of different things in the same goal. So hopefully you can kind of see that a goal that's written on the left-hand side versus a goal that's written on the right, that even just thinking about that with a strength-based PLAF, you know that someone likes animals and they want to be a vet clinician when they grow up. How then do we engage the person on the left-hand side to participate more often and to communicate with their AAC device, right? There's a lot of examples in the resource, so I encourage you to take a look at those. Again, just calling it back to those 3 overarching major learning components. Really thinking about how the high quality of those goals and the inclusive IEPs can cover all 3. That goal that we just looked at, it's covering how they would engage in grade level academics with other people. It's talking about how they can interact with others, and it's how they're participating in routines and transitions. So that goal actually ticks the boxes on all 3 and considers that whole student across the whole day. So Jacobs, he's not focusing on isolated skills and deficits that he has. They're looking at his learning, his engagement, and it's those generalization. So we want him to do it across more places, more people, more settings, more often, right? So these are just 3 of his, I think there are 7 goals in the resource, but the first 3 are increasing his use of his AAC device, expressing his ideas, thoughts, and viewpoints more often and more consistently across the day. And these are just the goal, abbreviated goals, not the full goals are also in the resource. And then goal 3 is increase reading comprehension using tools such as graphic organizers, sentence stems, and word banks with visuals. So you can see that all 3 of just those goals can be stretched and are broad, rich, and varied. And based on those valued life outcomes that we heard that his family and he had of relationships and technology and use of his AAC. Okay. Okay, we'll do this Mentimeter. Are we good on time to do this one? I have too many screens open to be able to
Yeah,
tell.
I'll be honest, I think we're going to be tight. I think we probably ought to keep going. And then if we can open it up at the end,
Okay,
I think we're going to run out of time.
okay. We'll keep going then.
Okay.
Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about how when we're thinking beyond the school day for our IEP goals, that can really enrich the process of developing IEPs. So as Jen was talking about those writing goals to be broad, rich, and varied, it's, I think, easy to see how they're really anchored to things that are meaningful for the student. And so because of that, they would naturally apply beyond the scope of the school day. They'd provide opportunities for those goals to be practiced in a lot of different settings, a lot of different people, a lot of different contexts. And because of that, because they're anchored to something that's meaningful for the student and perhaps also for their family, it will just translate well into those other settings because, you know, our students are not, they're not just people who live at the school, they're whole people and have all of those different opportunities for learning and engagement. So when we're thinking in this way, we also feel that that enhances opportunities for families to see themselves in the IEP, participate in the IEP process more meaningfully, and we just think this leads to better outcomes overall. So we'll show you a quick example of how we've provided a little context for that in the resource. So the big idea here, and you'll if you access the resource, the guide, you'll see a little bit more detail here. But the big idea is that Jacob's IEP goals were written with and maybe it sounds kind of obvious, but the awareness that he's a whole person who has a life outside of school as well. And so those priorities, those interests and needs and things that make, you know, that help us understand Jacob as a whole person are included as considerations as we write IEP goals. So here are a couple examples. The team that, including Jacob and his family, I should say that the IEP team as a term is inclusive of the family participating as well as the student if they're participating too. So the whole team brainstormed how Jacob could, his goals might be able to be plugged into his extracurricular activities like unified baseball. The team prioritized supporting Jacob and his family to feel more comfortable using and programming his AAC device for communication. And then they kind of included a little bit of language around training for when new technologies would be implemented. So anticipating there might be updates for the AAC device or other new technology that's available down the road. They planned ahead to say, you know, if we have new technology that becomes available, we'll make sure to provide training for Jacob and his family. All right, so that's how we're thinking about those goals. We want to talk a little bit now about the service delivery and least restrictive environment or LRE components to the IEP. So this is where we would say, all right, we've got our present levels and we've used those and the valued life outcomes shared by the student and family to write our goals. And now we need to start thinking about how we're providing services that support the student to reach those goals and where, what we're thinking about in terms of placement. So, you know, the context in which we'll provide those services. So a couple key components here that we just wanted to highlight is that we think that that decision about providing services in the least restrictive environment needs to, we need to ensure that it supports the student's progress toward those valued life outcomes. I think someone mentioned in one of our earlier Mentimeters that it's important that we're not thinking in terms of how to align the IEP with a program. And that's exactly how we think about it as well. We want to make sure that the IEP is, including the decisions about services and placement, are supporting the student in reaching those valued life outcomes rather than saying, well, we've decided that you'll be in this program, and so we're going to make sure that those services kind of fit into the model of that program. One way that teams can do this is with flexible service delivery. And I'll give you a little more information about that in a couple slides when we show you just a sneak peek of another resource document. But we're just wanting to support teams in thinking about creative ways that special education services and related services and other supports can be provided in general education classrooms and other general education learning spaces to the greatest extent that we can. All right, we can look at the next slide. That's all right. So again, just mentioning too that if we are in positions where we have services that need to be provided outside of a general education classroom, how are we using those flexible learning spaces to do that? We know that sometimes students do need or benefit from a degree of, a quiet learning space, or even in some cases a private space. If they're receiving, say, counseling or mental health services as part of their IEP. So there might be times where we'd say it would be best for those things to not happen inside the context of a classroom where there's a lot going on and maybe it's harder to access those services. So where are our alternatives that are flexible learning spaces that maybe all students have access to for similar services? And then we think another key consideration is that, sometimes teams will share with us that they want to do inclusion, they want to improve in those services, but students maybe come into their district with really restrictive services, and that's kind of their starting point. Or maybe that's the starting point that their district, the way their district has operated, and they're trying to move forward towards more inclusive services and are just not sure how to begin. So if we're looking at an IEP where a student has been placed in more restrictive settings for more of their day, we just want to be always thinking about, all right, what's the plan for increasing our time in those general education settings? We want the assumption to be that we're always moving towards that arrangement in which that student is in general education settings with their peers 80% or more of the school day. And so if we're not there yet, what's our plan for getting to a place where we are? So if we look at the next slide, there's a resource. And again, this is on that resource kind of one pager that we've shared with you. It's on the website for Comprehensive Inclusive Education in Washington. So this is just just there to draw your attention to it. It's a document that has some guiding questions for teams about inclusive service delivery. So it's just a worksheet where teams can come together and say, all right, how are we thinking about those things like flexible service delivery? How are we thinking about how our decisions about services and placement support the student in reaching their valued life outcomes? Or have we inadvertently just made those decisions based on maybe convenience or how we've done things in the past? So we think this is a helpful tool as teams make those considerations and start shifting their practices to be more inclusive. All right, we can move to the next slide. So something that's often a focus for folks in Washington is how we're thinking about specially designed instruction, so special education services, and then related services and supplementary aids and services, which are also part of special education. A couple things, I'll move through these fairly quickly. A couple things to know about specially designed instruction. I'll refer to that as SDI. And these other services is that we're focusing on making sure that students can access instruction and learn new skills and knowledge, and that all students have equitable access to that instruction. So those are some important things to know about the purpose of those services. We've got kind of the definitions on the next slide. Whoops, I lost my place. So SDI is really a lot of the work that we do to provide special education services that are connected to the core curriculum and grade level standards. So when we're providing SDI, what we're doing is we're adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to make sure that the student has access to the general curriculum and can meet the state's grade level educational standards. Related services are services that address barriers that might exist for the student in accessing their special education services. So related services might include things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, if they're there to address those barriers to accessing those services. Transportation is even a related service. If you can't get to school, you can't access your special education services. So those are important to think about as part of the IEP. Something that you might be interested in and see called out in the resource is a little bit of a consideration about how counseling or mental health services might fit into an IEP, potentially as a related service if a student's needs in the area of mental health support or behavioral health support, if those needs are preventing them from accessing their special education services. And we think that's an area where there's not a ton of guidance right now, and it seems to be more relevant than ever. So it might be something to look for in that document if that's of interest to you. And then finally, supplementary aids and services are the supports that allow students to be in those environments the maximum extent possible. And so sometimes those might just be other supports that help the team consider the barriers in the learning environment that historically have prevented them from thinking about serving students in those contexts. All right, we can move to the next slide, and I'll just show you again that we have another quick resource document. Again, we won't go through this a ton, but these are just more guiding questions for teams that are thinking about decisions around SDI related services and supplementary aids and services. So some of those questions might include, thinking very, thinking really authentically about how we can look at our learning environments, how we are making sure that we're increasing the students' engagement, and whether or not the services that we're providing are culturally responsive, meet the needs of our multilingual learners, and those sorts of things. So we hope that's helpful to you. All right, we can go to the next slide. So we're just bringing it back to these three questions. Will the student experience belonging as a member in their school and education and general ed classrooms as a result of the IEP that we've developed? Will they be actively participating across the school day? And will they be learning the grade level general ed curriculum? So again, if the answer to these questions isn't yes, we're encouraging teams to go back and revisit their IEPs to make sure that it can be. All right, we can move to the next slide.
Okay. So the next thing is when we're talking about its implementation. We want to write it, but then we got to make it come alive. And so what we've seen, and this has really sparked a lot of ideas in the teams that we've been sharing with, is the Education Day at a Glance. And the Education Day at a Glance is, next slide, Jen. Thank you. It has 4 components. It has the daily schedule grid, which is the daily schedule of the gen ed classroom. It has the IEP goals at a glance, which helps you. It says during the daily grid at this time of the day, we're prioritizing these goals. Doesn't mean you can't do more, but we're going to say we're going to prioritize these goals for sure. And then we can look across the day and make sure that we have everything covered across the day, that all goals are being worked on at some time across the day, and often many times. It does the supports and accommodations at a glance, and then also you can put in pretty quick data collection plans. We talked about measurable. You have to write a measurable, then you have to collect data, and that's how we all know if we're really, and we build confidence and trust that the IEP is being implemented. So the next one, Jen. So what we found is that the IEP at a glance has, the Education Day at a Glance has really multiple uses. First, Gen Ed can see how the IEP goals, Gen Ed teachers and other teams can see how the IEP goals integrate across the school day. Parents can see where the IEP goals integrate across the day. Paraprofessionals kind of know what they're focusing on at different times. Substitute teachers can use this to have a sense of what happens during different periods of the day. It also is something, it's not a fixed document. It's not part of the law that this has to be done, but it's a bridge to making this IEP meaningful. It's something that can be quickly, juggled around to cover. So say there's a field trip during the day or something and you have to build it in, or there's something else special going on for a couple weeks with a new unit. Like you're gonna really, with the new unit, you can focus on some other goals or change or modify what the goal, the pieces you're focusing on for that period are. This is if it's on your computer, you just pull it up, you modify it, boom, it can be shared out in an email. Everybody has the same piece of communication. So it acts as a really good communication tool that shows you how everything integrates together. And this goes back to the questions that Jen asked at the beginning when the three people were asking, how do we fit this in across the day? This is a bridge that after we've written it to fit in together, we implement it. So this one you see in Jacob's Education in a Day, I'm just going to actually, I'll let you scan that yourself and just go to the next one and show you the example of Jacob. And this is one where you see now, when you go into the tool, you will see that there's a template that you could fill in on this, but it's easy enough to create on your own computers too. But you can see the daily class schedule. This is the Gen Ed class schedule. What are the embedded IEP goals that are going to be focused on there? At the bottom of this are just some really, quick IEP goals at a glance, not the whole goal. I mean, goal, you can put them there too, but you can also have them at a glance. And then the supports and accommodations that are needed for that period. And those could adjust too as you have different units. So it brings it all together in a one-pager, a two-pager that lets you it becomes almost your GPS for how to put the roadmap in place across the day. And the next one, yeah, so that's a template that you can download and play with it or just create on your own. And I think people are modifying them. Education days at a glance have been, I mean, this has been a strategy that's been around for a long time. It's really helpful. But by doing it here, what it does is it pulls together, you've written the goals so that they're very, you're thinking about how they're going to be implemented in the school day. It pulls it all together in a nice, neat package. Okay, so next one. Maybe we should do the, well, let's see. We've got 10 minutes. We got to do step 4. Should we do step 4 and then open it up and kind of do questions? I think that might be the way to do it.
Sure. So,
Okay, because we got 10 minutes left.
all right, so we're going to talk a little bit now about how we keep this rolling throughout the school year in a way that makes sense and is efficient for everyone on the team, in particular the school teams who we're thinking about for this step. So we can go to the next slide and we'll take a quick look at that. What we anticipate teams doing across the year is looking at the IEP and the education day at a glance. Those are not set in stone. In particular, that education day at a glance can be updated in ways that are responsive to instruction that's happening or other changes in the school day, if we think those will be helpful to reflect there. So as we're working together and collaborating together in school teams, what we want to do is plan ahead to make sure that the work that we've done to lead up to this point doesn't kind of end with the development of the IEP and the education day at a glance, that we're always reflecting on and revising things as we need to make sure that the student is able to make progress and access grade level instruction. So here are some steps for that. We'd say that it's important for the special education teacher or case manager to be collaborating during grade level planning meetings. This is really essential so that special education teacher is able to forecast and understand the content that's going to be provided in instruction in the classroom. So they'll know the focus of instruction, the expectations, some of the activities, and how maybe the kind of evaluation will be done to make sure students are understanding. And this supports making sure that the student has everything they need to access those strategies. They can collaborate with general education staff if there are questions about how to make sure that that student is still accessing instruction and has what they need to do that. So that's a really important step, is making sure that those planning meetings aren't done in silos, that we're bringing staff together in that way. So we'll unpack that a little bit more on the next slide. As teams are working together, the special education teacher can support by identifying IEP goals that plug into those general education units or activities or other instructional things that are happening. Sometimes what might then be needed is for the team to go look at that education day at a glance and say, oh, I see other opportunities to add these, to embed these goals into these activities, or I see a place where we might need to adjust some supports or accommodations to make sure the student's able to access these things. Think about a student who uses a communication device to be able to participate. So if that student does use like an AAC device for communication, a voice output device, it might be necessary at different points in instruction to say, we're going to go into that device and just make sure that they have all the vocabulary that they might need to be able to participate with their peers in this activity that we have coming up. Or we know that, we're going to be asking these sorts of questions. And so we want to make sure the student has what they need in order to participate just like anyone else would. So those are the kinds of things that this kind of collaboration can support teams to do. On the next slide, we'll look at a resource for that really quickly. So the TIE Center has this wonderful resource, the 5, 15, 45 tool, or what the best teams do with 5, 15, or 45 minutes. I think that's on the resource sheet, folks, is that right? So as you've been accessing that one-page resource sheet, you can find a link to that there. You also find a link to that on the website for our guidance document as well. That'll connect you over there to the TIES website for this. But it's a really powerful tool. We know that teams don't always have the amount of time that they'd want. And so this is a helpful way of saying, even if you don't have as much time as you think you might need, here are some things you can do even with a very, very small amount of time so that you're supporting these processes and we're able to partner for inclusive education. All right, so we'll look at the next slide really quickly. This is just another example of how Jacob's team engages in this collaboration. I'd encourage you to check this out in the main document. We won't go through this today, but just another example of how that collaboration might look for Jacob. And then on the next slide, we're just kind of bringing it home. So these are our principles, again, of comprehensive inclusive education. The IEP is not the sole educational program or curriculum. We hope that's been clear as you've looked at these processes that are really intended to be situated in a general education context. And in the context of the school's routines and activities, and the IEP just being there to provide the supports needed for students to access those things. Every student is a general education student. We've in Washington, we've tried to stop saying the phrase that we've heard a lot, which is every student is a general ed student first. I think it's maybe a nice idea, but I think it still puts up a little barrier in folks' minds where they think, well, they're a general ed student first, and then after that, they're a separate sort of student. And so we just want to affirm that each and every student is a general ed student, and then some students need additional services and are eligible for additional services that support them in accessing the learning and activities that all students have the right to access in school. And that we want to make sure that the IEP is designed so that students are valued and visible members of their classrooms and school communities. They're not tucked away in a closet somewhere. They're visible participants and members of their school communities. All right, so we're starting to get close to the end. We have a couple of just small housekeeping slides. We're really thankful for your time and attention today. If you're so inclined, we'd love to hear your feedback on today's session. This is the QR code, but also there's a link in your resource, that one-pager document that you can use to access that. Since we're close on time, I think we should move on from this slide. So grab that QR code really quickly if you need it, but you can also access the resource sheet. And then I'd like to just maybe move to our last slide and show you really quickly, there's an additional resource on our website at OSPI, at the state agency, that's about myths and facts about inclusionary practices in Washington state. And we think this will also be really helpful for folks even outside of Washington in pushing back against some of the limiting beliefs that sometimes adults have in accessing or in supporting students to access more inclusive learning. So I'll share that link in the chat. But yeah, I think we have just a couple minutes. If there are questions, please feel free to share those in the chat. And then I know Devon had some closing remarks as well. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you. We've been reading all the chat and getting ideas. And Diane, thank you for thinking about lessons versus curriculum. We went from standards to curriculum so that we could get more specific, closer to the actual happening in the classroom. I know you're going with that direction. I think it's interesting. Thank you, Joseph. I'm glad you were able to participate today too. And you have such that reach with your pre-service program. That would be wonderful. Let us know how it goes if you start integrating it in the curriculum. We would love to hear and get feedback on it.
Yeah, please do. Our contact information is on one of those first slides. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or other thoughts. We're always happy to have that
Yeah,
conversation.
thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Joseph. Ah, yes, takes away from the myth you can embed and generate, yeah, some self-contained classes. Yep, that is a myth. Any final questions or anybody wants to kind of put up? And then, oh, actually, Devon is going to close things out.
Yes, thank you so much. What a great presentation. A lot of valuable information. So I hope everyone had the opportunity to download what they needed, and of course, reach out if you need anything. We will have the recording up and to deliver to everyone next week. Thank you all. And next week's webinar is next Thursday, May 22nd. And it is on financial planning in unique circumstances. So we thank you again for joining, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks.